Hello, lovely soul family. Welcome back to Undefined Life. And today we're jumping into a nice juicy topic. This is something that I'm really interested in. And this was actually the entry point to my spiritual awakening and spiritual journey, and has been such a pivotal and essential foundation for my journey. And I think it's so important that we speak about this. And that is the role and purpose of the ego. So I'm going to give you my perspective on the ego today. You can take what resonates, leave what doesn't. I'm sharing from my direct experience and research. So let's address the ego from the perspective of our multidimensionality. And I'm going to start with just briefly explaining the purpose and role of the ego. Why do we have an ego? Why does it form? What's the point of it? So, in a nutshell, the ego's primary purpose is to keep us safe. I really want to draw attention to this because the ego's got a pretty poor reputation in spiritual communities, understandably, right? Especially in yogic philosophy, in the yogic system, which is the system that I have the most familiarity with regards to Eastern teachings. The ego is demonized. The ego is considered an entity or something that we need to dissolve and that we really need to, for lack of a better word, destroy. And I want to just offer a slightly less abrasive view of the ego today, because I completely understand that perspective. But on my own journey, and as I continue to evolve in my own consciousness, I am learning how to perhaps work with the ego in a way that makes it less dualistic. So, as I said, the ego's primary purpose is to keep us safe. Let's talk about why that's the case and why it forms. And to do that, we have to go back to the beginning of all things and time and space. So in the beginning, there was the creator, right? In the beginning, there was just pure consciousness. There was the I am presence, God, universal intelligence. Insert your preferred synonym here, right? So at the beginning, we have just source consciousness. At the level of the non-physical, there are no limits and there are not the same experiences that we have here in the physical. So when we are birthed into physical form, this applies to humans and animals too. Animals have egoic consciousness as well. So when we come into a physical form, we have gone from the field of singular consciousness, the singularity, right? The oneness state, into a sense of individualization. So all of a sudden I've gone from being connected to the field of everything at the level of the non-physical to being birthed in a physical body, which feels very separate to the rest of my physical world, right? And at the level of the 3D, that's absolutely true. But I'm here to show you kind of the multidimensional perspective, right? Because there are, of course, layers to this. It's not just the 3D that we are and that we're experiencing. But at the level of the 3D, Natasha, this avatar, this physical vehicle, the body and the mind consciousness, is physically separate to the rest of this experience, right? And so why is that important? Because the ego's job is to give us a healthy sense of individuality. The ego's role is to help us in physical form remain safe. And I often say this to friends and clients, but I'm going to share this now, right? Imagine I drop into physical form and I remain in my oneness state, which we do to some degree as babies. We get conditioned out of it very quickly. Imagine I moved through my entire experience like most people do when they take psychedelic or heart expanding drugs, right? And I was completely in the oneness state. I'd gone back to universal consciousness. What would happen if I navigated my 3D experience like that? Well, given that the 3D world at this particular moment is still very dense, what would happen is I would walk out into the middle of a road and I'd be like, we are one. And a car would drive at my physical vessel and destroy it, right? And I would not be able to tell the difference between me and a vehicle that was potentially a threat or danger to my life because I'm in the oneness, I am consciousness state, right? So the ego's job is to help us recognize that in the physical form, we are separate to our physical environment and other aspects of the physical environment, other people, other animals, other conditions around us, so that we can stay safe. Now, I like to describe the ego as outdated software. And I want you to think of your consciousness a little bit like a computer, okay? The ego was human 1.0. And the ego really served us when we were hunter-gatherers, when we were roaming the land. This is prior to us developing in settlements, right? So I think the human species, the Homo sapiens, settled in settlements and communities where we started harvesting the land around 10,000 years ago, possibly before that, if you are someone that's interested in ancient civilizations. But prior to that, prior to being settled and establishing communities that we live in now, we were roaming the land. So what does that mean in terms of our egoic consciousness? It means that when we were roaming the land, we were exposed to our environment and the many different aspects of it, right? We were encountering many unknowns throughout the time of being in hunter-gatherer consciousness. We were constantly facing different weather conditions. We were roaming to find food, right? And so we were often entering different territories that maybe we hadn't been to before, and then encountering predators in all of these different environments. Our ego really served us then. So when we were hunter-gatherers, the ego really served us, okay? It helped us access and feel a healthy sense of individuality so that we were aware and alert with regards to our external environment, and so we could be aware of threats around us, right? Threats to our physical bodily health, which is its job. It's attached to physical form. Whenever we come into a form and individualization, there is ego present. Okay, and as I said, its primary role is one of protection. So it needs to be there so that we can be alert and aware that when we're in physical form, there's a tiger over there. It's fucking cold, and I need to be able to sense that the weather conditions, that I am not just a kind of expression of this physical experience, that I am actually separate to the conditions of the physical experience, so that I can maintain my unique vessel, my individual system, right? So the ego really served us during that time. As I said, it's outdated software. We've come on a long way as a species from the time of when we were roaming the land. We're now obviously in fixed settlements most of the time for most of the population. And our shift in consciousness is accelerating now at an unprecedented rate. And certainly within the last 10,000 years, ancient civilizations too, when we've been settled in communities, we have really begun to understand and access our multidimensionality. You know, look at Lemuria, Atlantis, and then obviously these more recent systems that have accessed our true potential, yoga being a system that I've worked with more closely, that is speaking to and is designed to help us access our true nature. So as a species, we've evolved to understand that we are not just these physical bodies, that there is more to this experience, right? That we are actually expressions of that oneness consciousness in physical form. I like to kind of imagine it as source consciousness almost being like an octopus or a squid with many different tentacles, and the expressions and physicality are just the many different tentacles of that kind of source animal, if you like. And so it's not an animal, by the way, just using that as an analogy. So we are all just branches of source, right, in physical form. And so we've developed to understand that now. We have an awareness of that. And many people who are on the awakening journey are beginning to embody that knowing more and more and more. They're beginning to download, install that soul software, understanding that we are not just physical bodies that live and die, that there is a consciousness that animates this physical body that cannot die and was never born per se, right? It's just the being state of all that is. And so as we continue to evolve on our journey as a species and as a humanity, as beings, and on an evolving planet too, because Gaia is shifting frequency with us, the ego's role is getting a bit tricky. And I mean, that's like an understatement, right? Because you only have to look at the state of the world. You only have to look at the state of the collective to see how the ego, when it is not managed, when there is no awareness of it, it runs rampant. It doesn't know its limits. I was running a yoga class this morning, and I said to the students in the class that I want you to kind of think about the ego like a toddler that has never been set any boundaries. I mean, toddlers, if you've spent any time with toddlers, my niece is a toddler. I used to teach kindergartners when I was in Vietnam. If you spent time with toddlers and that kind of age group, you know that they are a handful, a bundle of energy at the best of times, right? Imagine a young child that had never been told any boundaries, had never been set any limits. They are just wild, right? And they can be really challenging to manage, for want of a better word. That's kind of the ego and where it's at now. It's like a kid that's been spoiled, that has never been told no, that has never been given any limits. It's, again, I use the puppy analogy a lot. The ego is like a puppy that is like, wants to go in a million different directions, does not know the hierarchy, does not know who's alpha, does not know who's top dog, and needs reminding firmly, consistently. So this is why we're in the state we are in collectively at the moment. Because the ego is anchored in our physical separateness, right? It's ultimately attached to this sense of separateness, this sense of individuality. And the issue is that we're obviously evolving to install and embody our unity consciousness, our oneness consciousness, which is in contrast to the ego's nature, which is inherently separate, right? So you can see why all of a sudden the ego, when we are going on our spiritual journey, kicks up one hell of a fuss. Because as we continue to journey towards unity consciousness and remembering our true state and nature, the ego becomes less relevant. And the ego's job is to survive, is to help us survive. And by extension, it believes that anything that moves us away from the sense of separateness is a danger to itself and to us. Okay? So on this journey, on the spiritual journey, the ego will naturally present itself. And I would like to move away from this narrative that the ego is evil and that we need to obliterate it and that we need to dissolve it into nothing. I mean, if we dissolve our ego into a nothing state, we become no thing, which is our true nature. But if we become the no thing, all thing state in physical form, we become blobs. And I'm going to give you a really brief example. I did a Kriya Yoga course and I was initiated into Kriya Yoga when I was in India in 2019. This is a subset of Kundalini Yoga. The guru that initiated me, his guru was supposedly one of the kind of like enlightened gurus in India at this time. And his guru was so embodied in his I am consciousness, right? Yoga is all about transcending the human experience, right? And leaving the form to some degree and accessing our true state of consciousness. The issue with this ascending model of wanting to leave the body and move up into source is that when it comes to trying to be a human, that makes life pretty fucking difficult. And it was really interesting because I never met my guru's guru, but he would often describe that he just sits. He sits and he meditates and he's barely there. You know, it's like he might open his eyes a little bit, he'll connect with people a little bit, and then he'll go back into deep states of meditation and just the being state. As someone that goes into trance channeling states very easily after my Kundalini awakening, I too can vouch for this. It's very difficult when you're connected to the I am consciousness to retain a sense of healthy individuality. So the issue with wanting to obliterate the ego is that when it comes to still being where we are right now in physical form, it means that we end up doing fuck all, right? And we are actually here as creators in physical form to build, create, play, explore, learn, grow. That's why we came into physical bodies. So as I say, we need a healthy degree of individuality. We need a healthy degree of ego. How do we go from being completely ego dominated, completely, you know, with the ego running the show essentially? How do we go from that to living in healthy, I don't even want to say partnership, but how do we move into a more healthy dynamic with the ego where it knows its place? And the simple answer is that we have to be persistent, consistent, and devoted to our mindset work, i.e., understanding the nature of the mind, understanding the nature of thoughts, the fact that they're just thoughts, as opposed to being absolute truth, which is what people take their thoughts as. We have to commit ourselves to presence so that we can become aware of the thoughts we think and the feelings we feel. We have to become aware of the stories and the narratives and the limitations that the ego has had us invested in for so long, because it serves its survival, which it believes is serving our survival. So let's give a tangible example of why the ego can be really challenging and prove to be such a difficult force when we're on our evolutionary journey in terms of our spirituality. I'm going to use my example. I was in a relationship dynamic last year with someone who I love and care about very deeply. But we had two very different modes of being. I'm committed to my journey of returning to my truth in physical form, right? In an embodied way, soul truth, soul mission, living in soul alignment. That means that I have to face the many aspects of my consciousness that are anchored in illusion, delusion, separateness, fear, which is all the realm of the ego. Means facing the egoic consciousness within myself, managing it so that I can let my soul, I can download my soul consciousness and let that lead the way, right? And then I can use my egoic consciousness, which is this individual sense of agency and will, to exercise my soul's desires in the physical world. It's kind of a marriage of the two. The person that I was involved with last year, while a beautiful and I believe evolved being, was still anchored in a lot of fear consciousness, which of course is the realm of the ego. And so I could feel that his ego didn't fully want to commit to me and our journey together. And I believe this individual is my twin flame, and this is often the case in twin flame dynamics. I could feel that there was egoic resistance there, because on some level his ego could sense that being with me would involve some degree of moving from separateness and limitation consciousness to more expanded awareness. And to the ego, that is the most terrifying thing possible, because that equates to death to the ego, right? And remember, the ego's purpose is to keep us alive, right? It's intent on survival. So to the ego, conceptual, ideological death and physical death are the same thing, right? Whether it's the death of a sense of identity, which is not really a physical death, that is the same thing to the ego. So this is why the ego can be so freaking tricky on our journey, because it will often pop up in the form of limiting beliefs, in the form of, self-doubt, self-criticism. The inner critic is a branch of the ego, okay? It will pop up to try and keep us in our pens. So an analogy that came through yesterday was that you could imagine the ego is like a sheepdog, right? And we're the sheep, right? And we're trying to get out of our pen and truly explore our land, our experience. And the ego's job is to keep us in the pen, because when we're in the pen, yes, we're limited. Yes, it's cramped. Yes, we're not maybe living our true potential and purpose, but we're safe. At least this is known territory in the pen. We know what the risks are here. We know what the danger is here. So it's trying to serve a purpose. It's trying to keep us safe. It just does it in really wonky and maladaptive ways because it views the soul's journey in evolution and purpose as a threat to its survival and ultimately a threat to our survival. And so when we're navigating our path, we really have to start, it's really about mastery. It's really about mastering the mind. It's really about understanding the nature of the mind and therefore the emotions, because they are innately connected, and understanding that we are neither our minds and the thoughts that we think, nor are we the feelings we feel. They're both experiences arising in our consciousness, and we're here to observe them, allow them to flow, and not be mastered by them. Okay? And so if you are looking to work with your ego and to start to get a handle on it, you've got to start working on being present and mindful on a moment-to-moment basis. Stop the momentum of the mind, because the ego's biggest grip that it has on you is through this, right? And then once you slow the momentum of the mind down and you start to observe the nature of the thoughts you're thinking, the beliefs you hold, and then you alter those, because you have autonomy. You get to choose what you think and believe about this reality and your experience, right? That's why you're here as a soul, to create and experience the reality that is going to be in highest alignment. Once you start to do that, you start to be able to see when you are in soul and source consciousness versus when you are in egoic consciousness. You'll feel the difference, and you'll be able to use the ego when it serves you rather than the ego using you, which is what is happening to most people on the planet. We are essentially seeing an ego shit show at the level of the collective, which is why there's such dissonance, right? Because these tendencies of the ego to feel separate, to feel individualized, to feel fear of being threatened in those states is pushed to the max. It's on steroids. And everyone feels so threatened that their individuality, their survival is threatened by others, by the world, by change, that they get really hardened in their ego to try and protect themselves. The ego fears death and it fears change, which you could argue are one and the same. So be aware that your evolutionary journey as a soul here on Earth is going to require you to change and move through lots of change, right? It's going to require you to change your circumstances, your mindset, your embodiment, the people you interact with, the habits you have, and you're going to constantly then bump up against your ego, and it's your job to recognize that and not be mastered by it. So I hope this has been helpful. It's a little intro into the ego, my perspective of the ego. I'd love to hear your thoughts and feedback below. Pop what you're thinking in the comments. If you've got any questions, suggestions, love to hear it as always. If you are not already subscribed to my channel and you like this type of content, please hit subscribe. Also feel free to like and share this video. It really helps with the algorithm picking up my channel, getting this information to more people. And if you're interested in working with me in any capacity, I'm actually offering spiritual guidance sessions on a donation basis. These are 60-minute sessions. I also offer energy healing sessions. I'm a light language channel and a Reiki practitioner. So the info about that is in the description box. I'll also pop some info in the comments. I have really enjoyed connecting today, and I look forward to sharing more with you really soon. Take good care, everyone.